Hello and welcome back to my channel. As you may or may not know, I am Canadian. And although some Canadians would like to think that racism doesn't exist in Canada, they are sorely mistaken. What is happening in the US is also applicable here. But in addition to Black people being persecuted and systemic racism, we also have Indigenous people who are suffering under the hand of that as well. Take for instance the fact that currently, right now, I own this property, but it's on stolen land. This was all owned by Indigenous people, and white settlers came and took their land from them. And yeah, I am in Treaty 6 territory. Gosh, this is difficult, and that's the thing. It's like, it's good to feel uncomfortable. It's good to put yourself out there, and just knowing that you probably will make mistakes talking about it. I will probably make mistakes talking about it, but I'm gonna have the humility to listen, hear the problems, or hear the mistakes that I've made, and apologize for them with no buts, and learn what I've done wrong and be able to teach that to other people, because staying silent is not an option. It is violence in its own way. Sorry, I got my little notes here. Canada is stolen land that was built largely by people stolen from their land. Black people as slaves, because yes, Canadians did have slaves. Originally, I was thinking that I wouldn't post social justice issues here because I have no way to monetize them. I have a small following, and I was concentrating my efforts on my Instagram account, where that's my largest platform. But then I started thinking about it more, and I realized that if I were to be talking to a room of 200 people, I would feel nervous, because that's a lot of people. So why is 200 subscribers on my channel different than a room of 200 people? So unfortunately, I can't donate AdSense money because I'm not monetized. However, I have been donating my own money to different organizations that are local in my city, but also to a couple bail funds as well. I will leave information down below as well. I mean, if you don't have money to donate, there's so many other things you could be doing. There's a YouTube video that all of the AdSense is going to, I think, Black Lives Matter. I will link that down below too. So just watching the ads on that, donating. Also signing tons of petitions. But anyway, sorry. I don't know who needs to hear this, but Black and Indigenous lives matter. And the fact that there are still people who are arguing otherwise is mind-blowing and so terribly wrong. Let's begin with Indigenous lives matter and a quick history lesson. Canada, as we know it, is stolen land. The Europeans came over here and discovered it, even though it was never unknown or lost to the people who actually lived here, the Indigenous. And the settlers decimated the Indigenous population by diseases that they brought on the boats, introducing alcohol, and then also by systematically killing the vast population of bison. I think bison's the scientific name. Anyway, by systematically killing the majority of the bison that were here, which is how Indigenous people, it was like their livelihood essentially. They got their food from it, their clothing, they used bones as tools. Like, they used every single part of the bison. So by killing off the bison, you're essentially killing the way that they live. It's their lifestyle, essentially. They knew what they were doing. And by they, I mean settlers, by killing off bison. So that's just the beginning. Then come the reservations and the residential schools and racial profiling. I can't remember if I said this, but the RCMP was created to deal with Indigenous people too. So there's also that. Other countless ways that racism has been introduced in our system. Some reservations still don't even have clean drinking water, and it's 2020. When there was the H1N1 flu happening, I think it was 2009, the Canadian government sent supplies to reservations, which were body bags. Like, not actual even supplies. then they say there's no racism in Canada. Oh, please, please. Oh, just makes me so angry. And if you're not angry, what are you even doing? How do you not see how inhumane this is? Anyway, sorry. There are free classes that you can audit from the University of Alberta about Indigenous Studies, and I will try and find the links for that and leave it down below too, because you can take them for free. Did I say free? They're free. But yeah, like residential schools, how was that not in our history curriculum? I didn't learn about that until I was in my 20s. That is unacceptable. The fact that the people who created the issues are the ones writing about what happened, like, biased much, of course they want to make it sound like it was so glorious and all these great things happened, and oh yeah, it was kind of bad that we did this, but like, look at Canada now. No, fuck that. This is fucking bullshit. And then we have slavery, because yes, Canadians did have slaves as well. Black people have been oppressed in Canada since the beginning, slavery, and then we also had segregation here too. And then once slavery was abolished, suddenly there was the invention of the police, which was basically made so that they can arrest Black people for the smallest of issues, to just put them into jail. And guess what? Modern slavery still exists because prisons have unpaid labor that they sell to big corporations. Like, what even is this? It's astounding. And on top of that, a bunch of the prisons are not even owned by the government too. They're for-profit prisons. So government is paying them to house these prisoners. And so of course the people with the jails want more people coming in, because then they get more money from the government to imprison people. And then they're selling the labor of the prisoners to manufacture products for large corporations. It's fucked.
Okay, so talking about this stuff is really difficult, and I definitely was feeling nervous and left out a bunch of stuff too, because it was a lot of information to be getting through. But, oh shit, hold on. But one of the things about privatizing prisons too is the fact that it's getting subsidized by the governments, because the governments are paying for it. So then taxpayers are subsidizing these prisons, and then these private prisons are selling slave labor. So the two people that are really winning from this situation is the privatized prisons and the corporations who are getting the labor for cheap. Taxpayers are essentially subsidizing both the prisons, but also these large corporations who don't actually want to pay money for people in the US to actually manufacture these items. So there's been some instances where judges have been outed for getting kickbacks from these prisons for giving criminals harsher sentences, because then the prisons make more money by having more people having to come serve time there. So the system's just like rigged. There's just so much shit that it's just overwhelming, the amount of information to swim through, but it is definitely worth opening our eyes to it.
And don't even get me started on the disproportionate amount of Black people who are still in prison on marijuana charges when it's become legal all across Canada and in several of the states. And on top of that, our governments are making crazy tax revenue on the sale of marijuana while people are in prison for having sold marijuana, but just like not quite when it was right. But it's legal now, so how does their sentence still stand? Blows my mind. It doesn't make any sense. So yes, Black Lives Matter. They have been oppressed by the systems since they came here. And Indigenous people, since, you know, this land was discovered and ripped from their ownership. It's mind-boggling. I'm gonna keep saying that, but it just is. So because of this systemic racism and how Black and Indigenous people have been treated in the past, they have never been on equal footing to, say, a white person. So we may not be white supremacists, but we still operate in a system that benefits us and white supremacy. So here's why the modern day issues have come to be, and it's not just, oh God, my camera's dying. Had to charge my camera for a little bit there. Hopefully it lasts long enough, but I think where I left off was talking about modern day issues. And so because Indigenous and Black people haven't been on the same footing as white settler people, this systemic racism has become the fabric of our society, and we don't even think about it anymore, which is terrible and needs to change. It's even down to the fact that, like, in the States, they planned out cities so that there would be poor sections of town, and those typically were where Black people were to live. The cycle of poverty continues for them because the system, it is not set up to enrich their lives in any way. It does the exact opposite, puts them in danger, where we have police that are just senselessly murdering Indigenous and Black people, in addition to like injuring them, racial profiling with carding. Carding's a huge thing in Canada. I will leave some links down below too. I understand why protesting is happening. It's sad to me that it took a pandemic to make so many more people, myself included, become more vocal about these issues, because for once we were at home and actively paying attention to the news and what was going on, and we weren't distracted with our, you know, carefree lives that don't include racism because we're white, so the system is set up to our benefit. And you know, we have George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and even the woman in Toronto who was thrown off her balcony by police, allegedly. I mean, her name was Regis Korchinski-Paquette. This is not okay. We need to defund the police, and that is a whole other video on its own. But essentially redistribute the money that the police are getting. In Edmonton alone, they're getting $80 million to build a shooting range. Well, our education's being cut, our social services are being cut. Like, it does not make sense. The police are not helping situations. They're just making it worse, and they are not trained to be empathetic at all. I digress. Yes, people are outraged and they're taking to the street, and even the looting, like I can understand why that is happening, because Black people and Indigenous people have been looted of their rights. They worked for free for 400 years. Black people did in slavery, worked for free. So they were looted of their labor and economic wealth. White people are the original looters. We looted land from the Aboriginal. We have looted artifacts. Just go to any museum and there's stuff from all over the world. Guess what? That was not gifted. They took it. That is looting. That is looting. So to see people who are in an economic crisis now because of COVID and this pandemic and losing jobs, and, you know, especially Black people, people of color, Indigenous, they are the people that are suffering the most during this pandemic because they do not have access to healthcare like other people, like white people. And this is especially in the States. In Canada, they aren't even taking statistics, I heard. They aren't even taking statistics on how the pandemic is affecting different people, like racially, because I believe too that Indigenous and Black people in Canada are most likely being affected more by the pandemic than white people. I don't have numbers on that, but it's fairly safe to say that what's happening in the States is probably a reflection of what's happening in Canada, because we are not that much different. Woo! So yeah, people are angry. They have lost their jobs. They're going to be losing their houses because of that. Plus the pandemic, people are losing their lives. Like, if you need basic necessities, yes, you are going to loot them. Like in this situation, like what other options do they have? It's crazy. It's like the question we should be asking is, why do they need to loot, you know? And it's because things have gotten so terrible. There is such a disparity in wealth in both Canada and the US that people are having a hard time living. It's like inflation has not matched wages since the 70s. And on top of that, it's just like the pandemic. I mean, I'm gonna keep saying the pandemic, but it's the pandemic. Back to Black people and their labor being looted. And even once they were able to get jobs, they were always paid less than white people. So like, again, wage compensation, not equal. It is harder for Black people to advance in their careers over their white counterparts. And I know we have been sold this idea of meritocracy, and that if you put enough time and enough effort, you too can have X, Y, Z and be the American dream. And it's just not true. The system is not set up to do that. And yes, there's people that slip through and are able to do that, but with incredible, incredible effort and luck in some cases too. Meritocracy is this lie that is sold to us by an ableist, white, misogynistic patriarchy capitalism. Capitalism is selling us this idea, and it's just not real. So yeah, and even like the way that the media is portraying white people looting versus Black people is just very telling. You know, like I saw one video where the newscaster was like, oh, well, maybe that person works there, and they were white, of course. And it's like, well, probably not. They're just taking stuff. But this is bigger than the protesting. This is the fact that Black and Indigenous people are constantly living in fear, and it's not okay. And we have to shout it out loud. Black and Indigenous lives matter. Not all lives matter. We are not in danger. White people are not in danger. We are not in danger. We can live our lives carelessly all we want. You don't get worried when you see a cop. Like, it's a completely different thing. People need to stop saying all lives matter, because that's not what we're focusing on right now. Right now, we are focusing on the people that are most in danger, and white people are not. It's not about us right now. It's about fixing the system, burning it down, and then fixing it. And I definitely think that that starts with defunding police, because their bloated budgets are just being spent uselessly. In Edmonton alone, I found out that they are spending money on posting billboards about parenting. Like, is that really up to the police to be telling people how to parent their children? No, and they're spending money on billboards for it. What the fuck is that? That sounds to me like a branch of the city that has too much money. I don't know if I've just blathered on and it just is not cohesive, but that's okay. I am trying my best, and there's always room for improvement, and I'm going to continue to do that by reading and listening and continually seeking out more information. But I also wrote something that I shared on my Instagram, which I think I'm just gonna say here because I think it really sums up like how I am planning on moving forward. Because yes, it's good to declare like Black and Indigenous lives matter, this is important, but like, where are we going to be and what are we going to do when this stops trending? I don't want to let this die and end. I want to keep fighting and continue my activism far beyond just these last 2 weeks. Anyway, whew, I'm gonna start crying. I called it Moving Forward, a manifesto. My fellow white people, we cannot let this energy slip when the media cycle moves on, when it's no longer trending, or even when our lives begin to get busy again. Our old normal is no longer an option. It does not exist anymore. We've signed petitions, we've posted on Instagram, so what now? People say it's time to do the work, but what exactly does that entail? From what I can surmise, it's not a linear path. The real work begins knowing that we might make mistakes, but that should not deter us. When we are called out on our missteps, we will have the humility to apologize without any buts, learn from the experience, and use it as an example to teach others. We go forward knowing that this is likely a marathon and we've only ever trained for a sprint. We will find the biases within us and where they've come from. We will learn what was left out of our history curriculum and how white people have benefited in innumerable ways from systemic racism by reading, watching, and listening. We will treat this like any other thing that we are truly interested in and invest our time finding new sources of information that allow us to rabbit hole. We won't just depend on the information that is neatly laid out for us in a well-designed post on Instagram. We will make time to have the uncomfortable conversations with friends, family, colleagues, acquaintances. We will realize that some relationships might not be salvageable, and that being too old to change their minds is a poor excuse that will no longer fly. We will call out injustices, even if that means putting ourselves in harm's way. Because newsflash, Black and Indigenous people are always in harm's way. Always. This one's important, guys. We will make sure that our activism is intersectional and includes feminism and the LGBTQ plus community. And when we are unsure of what acronyms stand for, or why using folks as in FOLX versus FOLKS is more inclusive, we will continue educating ourselves on these things by Googling them and looking them up rather than staying ignorant. We will stay vigilant and aware of media biases by increasing our media literacy. We will call for changes on headlines, video clips, and stories when they are slanted towards racism, victim blaming, or other unacceptable behavior. These agencies have the power to mold public perception and try to push their own agendas upon the viewers. We will show up and vote for politicians whose platforms align with our views and social justice issues. We will continue to sign petitions and send emails, but also commit to calling politicians too. Even though it can feel awkward and scary, phone calls and voicemails are a lot harder to ignore than form emails in an overflowing inbox. And applying consistent pressure is key. When there aren't protests to attend, we will protest with our purses. No longer will we blindly buy from corporations, local businesses, or brands who support corrupt governments, racists, or other hate groups. Nor will we support businesses who have been racist or non-inclusive to either staff or customers. We will hold them accountable and let our stances be known. We will compensate Black and Indigenous educators, creators, artists, musicians, businesses, and organizations for the work they've been doing all along. We will open our purses and make purchases and donate regularly, not just one time. And this is for my influencers and bloggers and creators out there. We will only work with brands who actively support Black Lives Matter, employ people of color, including Black and Indigenous, and work with diverse creators as well. We will only agree to speak on panels that are diverse and inclusive. We will support and amplify Black, Indigenous, and people of color creators by sharing their work accounts and suggesting them to our clients and helping them with other behind the scenes stuff like telling them what we're being paid, giving them contacts, all those things. And this is important too. We will let go of the idea of activism being off-brand or not fitting in our grid. Anti-racism is part of our brand, aesthetic, and lifestyles from now on, and not just when it's trending. This is obviously an incomplete list, but I will continue to keep adding to it on my own as well, of the things that I am planning on committing to doing in the long term, because this is not okay. And change and growth require consistency. The only way that you can develop a routine is by doing it consistently. And being anti-racist requires consistency and showing up and doing it always. So this is a forever thing, because think about how many years it took to create this problem. So it's going to require a lot of effort and a lot of people showing up. And if those protests have been any indication of the amount of people that feel deeply about this, I have hope that things can change. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry. Like, I'm not doing enough, and I am vowing to change that. I hope you'll join me. I think that's my piece. So thanks so much for watching. I really wish I had AdSense that I could donate, like I said, but I will be donating my own money and continuing to help the cause in other ways that I can figure out. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Toodles.